Hi everybody. I'm just taking a few minutes to help you out with linear programming. So on the homework for week 6, this is the beginning problem for you, and this video should help you through the first 6 problems. Okay, so I have my company that we're going to help out here, and what I'm going to do is set up this problem for you by adding in the formulas. So I made the cells that are going to be the important cells yellow in this. Okay, so what the problem says is that this company is trying to maximize their profit. And how they're going to do that is they're going to produce the optimal amount of air conditioners and large fans that'll give them the best profit. Okay, so these cells here, these yellow cells, are referencing the quantity that we want to produce of large fans and the quantity of air conditioners. And when we do that, for each air conditioner, we have a profit of $25, and each fan, we have a profit of $15. And then down here, I have my constraints. So what these mean is, when I produce an air conditioner, I'm going to use 3 hours of wiring. And when I produce a fan, I'm going to use 2 hours of wiring. And that's all subject to the company using no more than 240 hours. So once they hit 240, they've used up everything and they're going to have no slack, no extra wiring hours. Okay. So in each one of these cells, I have not yet put a formula in. So the first one I'm going to do is my profit. So when I go into the profit, how that's going to be calculated is take each air conditioner I produce, I'm going to make 25. So I'm going to multiply 25 times the quantity that I should produce plus 15 times the quantity that I should produce. And that's going to give us our profit number. And the way you do that in Excel is by using the sum product formula. And what this formula says is take an array. In this case, we're going to use the air conditioner fans profit amount first. And what we're going to do is multiply the 25 times the quantity plus 15 times the quantity. So my second array is my cells right below that, which represent the quantity. And that's all set up. Now I have to do my constraints. So this right-hand side of the constraints is just the amount. And with this, it only is the number. So all I did was type in the number for that one. There's no formula behind that. But on the left-hand side, that's where I want to use sum product again. So I'm going to push equals and do sum product one more time. And to save myself some time as I do the formulas in the rest of the constraints, what I'm going to do is when I highlight this quantity, now I have that quantity in, I'm going to make those cells stuck. So I'm going to put the dollar signs around the E and around the 8. Or the simplest way to do that is just push F4 on your keyboard. And I'm going to do the same thing for the next block. So I'm going to push F4 again. And now those are stuck on those cells. So I can just use that and slide it down to the rest of the constraints. So my next array is the part of that constraint. So in this case, it's the wiring hours. Okay. So close up my parentheses and that one is set. Now you notice after I put these in, there's a 0 now in both of these cells because the quantities are still empty. So Excel is saying 25 times nothing plus 15 times nothing gives you 0 for a profit. Okay, and I'm going to slide down my formatted cell here, and that's going to do all the rest. So if I click on this, you'll see it's still stuck on the quantity to produce, but what's happened is it's slid down to the drilling now. So it's taking this times this plus the quantity of large fans times the drilling. And these are all subject to these constraints over here. Now what I'm going to do, and this is just a visual thing, is put in the signs. So when I go into Solver, it'll make it a little bit easier for me to identify what my constraints are. So I'm also showing you this because some people in the past have asked me how I put those symbols in. And if you don't know, this will show you. So I'm going to go up to Insert ribbon, and I'm going to go over to Symbol. Now, the symbols that you most recently used come up in the bottom. So I'm kind of lucky because often I use the signs here, so they're coming up in there. So if not, you can just scroll here and find those within all of the symbols that are in the Excel program. Okay, so my first constraint says that I have 240 wiring hours. So I cannot use any more than those hours. So I'm going to do the less than sign, less than or equal to. And it's inserted. I'm going to close that. And then my first two constraints are the same. So I'm going to slide that down just to make it easier. And then I'm going to go back up to my symbol and put the correct sign, because they have a contract for air conditioners and they have to produce at least 20 air conditioners. So I want the opposite sign to go in there. And insert, and then my last one here is going to be the same as the top. And insert. Okay, so now my constraints all look very nice, and the last thing I have to do is Solver, and Solver is going to tell me the optimal solution. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go up to the data ribbon, and I already have Solver in my analysis chunk under the data ribbon, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Solver. Maybe. Okay, let me try this one more time. It's not working. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to clear these out. So we can start up fresh. And you'll notice when you use Solver, anytime you use Solver, it defaults to what you put in there last. Okay, so you don't have to go into put all the constraints back in, and you'll see this because we're going to change one of these constraints down here. So it's asking, what's my objective function? So my objective in this problem is to maximize profits. So I'm going to click on my profit cell. Now, if this was a cost problem where we were trying to minimize cost, I would click this button, and what Solver would do is find the minimum for the variable cells. Okay, but in this case we have profit, so whenever you hear profit, you usually want to maximize that. So we're going to keep that on maximum. Then it says, well, how are you going to do that? By changing what? By changing my quantities that I produce. So I'm going to click on here, and that's going to bring up my quantity cells. So what I also want to do is add in my constraints. So I'm going to click Add, and then we're now looking at the section down here. Okay, so what I'm really looking at is my left-hand side versus my right-hand side, and it's subject to these signs. Okay, so I'm going to put this cell as my reference cell, and my sign is correct. It defaults to the correct sign for this particular problem, and it's going to be subject to the right-hand side. and then I'm going to add that constraint. And I'm going to do that for each one of these constraints. So for this one, reference cell would be the G13 for my drilling, and it's subject to the 140. My sign is already correct, and I just need to put my right hand side in. And I add that, and you'll see where that goes in just a minute. And I have another constraint for what my contract, so you'll notice that the sign, this is just visual now, this sign in here is different than the signs above. So what I need to do is go to this drop down bar, and I need to pick the particular sign that I need to use for that constraint. And it's subject to the 20 to meet that contract. And I'll add that in my last one. I have to change that sign. Okay, so the sign defaulted back to the correct sign for that particular constraint. And I want to have that subject to my right hand side. Okay, so I add that. Now the last thing I do is I push cancel, and it's going to bring the original window back up from Solver. So now you can see that all my constraints have been added. The next thing I want to do is I want to make my constraints non-negative. Okay, so in the world of business, most of the time you're going to use this non-negative. Okay, maybe if you did something with currency exchange, you might do something where you would use a negative. But in this, we can't produce less than 0. So we want to make sure that this says non-negative and this box is clicked. The other thing we want to do is we're doing linear programming. So there's other options like non-linear programming. You would do that if you had like an exponential line as a constraint, but we're not. We're going to use linear programming. So we want to make sure that that's clicked. And remember, in older versions of Excel, all of this is available, but it just looks a little bit different. Okay. So now everything is done. All I have to do is push solve, and Excel's going to do the work for me. Okay, and then this little box comes up and says, do you want to keep the solutions? I'm going to say yes, because this is now the correct answers for these problems, the beginning problems. Okay, so one of the questions says, well, what's your slack? My slack is whatever I have extra available. So in this case, I would have 240, and what I ended up using was 240. So you can see what my slack is. I had 240, I used 240. I had 140 drilling hours, and I used 140 drilling hours. So this video will shows you what to do for the first 3 there, but we have a second part of this particular problem, and it says, what if they decide that they need 30 air conditioners? 30 air conditioners. So what would you do with that? What we would do with that is we would take this constraint for the air conditioners required, and we would change that. So you see here that we produced 40 air conditioners. So what we would want to do is change this right hand side to 30 and then go do Solver one more time. So I hope this video helps you out, and best of luck with linear programming. It's actually pretty fun once you get the hang of doing this whole setup in Excel. This is the tricky part, is just getting it set up. So best of luck, and if you have any questions, don't be afraid to email me or call me. Take care.